Welcome to Faith Fondue, a new podcast featuring author and speaker Haley DeMaria and teacher and blogger Ann Strickers. Faith Fondue will feature a melting pot of topics, ignited by a flame, our faith, and guided by the Holy Spirit. Each week will feature a theme, and the theme for this week's episode is Easter Continued. And Ann, we are now in season 2 of our podcast. With this continued Easter season, we continue our podcast, and we have some exciting news. Good morning, Ann.
Morning, Haley. Yes, this is a week of April 18, and I am excited. You could say maybe with Easter joy that we took some time over spring break to move our podcast to a new home. And thanks to a woman named Tiffany who, so many people, Haley, have talents in tech. And it just always amazes me what people know and how, fluidly they speak this language. She helped us to migrate and our files and put us onto iTunes. So not only are we on iTunes, but we are on a whole entire host of other platforms by which folks can access our podcast. So I'm excited because through iTunes or Stitcher or several others, you can listen easily to our podcast, perhaps while you're driving. I love to listen to a podcast when I'm walking. If you play a podcast while cooking, so great, wonderful ways to access a podcast that I think by naming season 2, we hit pause and said, what are we offering? What are we cooking through Faith Fondue? And really our hope, I think, is that our time together offers a way for people to think a little bit differently about their faith and how it's integrated into their lives. Like we said, if it's through sports, family, culture, pop culture, all of it. So we're excited to share and hope that our listeners will share easily now the ways to access Faith Fondue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I went, I have an iPhone, and I went right to my little purple podcast app on my iPhone and clicked on that, typed in Faith Fondue, and it popped right up. So that was an exciting moment for me to kind of see it in this, official format. So a huge thank you to you for taking the time, to Tiffany for helping us out. And of course, my son Edward, who's kind of been the tech support for the many months that we've been doing this, including about 5 minutes ago when I, texted him to ask him to help us out here. So
thank you, Edward.
And thank you, everyone. So it's exciting, this new season we have of not only the podcast, but the Easter season as well. And, Ann, I feel like we have so much to catch up on. I feel like we taped our Easter special and we taped our intro to the podcast last week. But, I love our time and our conversations together. And, for me, these past couple of weeks have really been kind of an emotional roller coaster. And, that's all part of life. And it's one of the things that makes our faith so important, is to have that grounding. But it's been interesting, for our listeners who are parents. I've been thinking about this question a lot. When does the act of parenting stop? Because it's certainly not when our children are in college. For those of you who know, I have a son who's a freshman in college, but, I'm learning they still need our support. They still need a listening ear. They still need our guidance. And most importantly, I think we sometimes forget children need our unconditional love. I think we know that as parents, but I don't know if it's always at the forefront of our minds. But, it's interesting because as you know, I started working recently this year at an elementary school. It's preschool through 8th grade, and I work in admissions. So I do a lot of tours for, young families or families of young children who are looking for a place to start their child's educational journey. And, it's so fun for me to see these little 2 and 3-year-olds explore the classrooms and to watch the parents interact with their children. And they ask such great questions about what we're doing at school and our philosophy and our, our view on parenting and raising, partnering to raise children. And it just makes me smile inside because what they're, the questions and concerns they have at 2 and 3 is sometimes very different than what I'm dealing with as a parent as a teenager, and actually sometimes not very different. So I kind of chuckle thinking, oh boy, if you think that this little issue you have with your 3-year-old is, going to go away, it doesn't. So it just, it made me think, at what point, do we stop parenting? Because at times, I got to tell you, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And are we still exhausting to our own parents? Do my parents get off the phone with me and find me exhausting? I can tell you, I am sure they do. So it's been an interesting journey, but again, I think it's why our faith is so important, and I think it's why being part of a community is so important as well.
Yeah, I agree. Haley, just listening to you, share kind of that question, I think you share it, and I think the answer, right? At what point does parenting stop? I don't think it ever stops, and I couldn't help but connect that to, the love of God and God as parent, God as father. And one of the words, it's been interesting, I've referenced the show Shitzel quite a bit, but in Hebrew, the word for, father or daddy is Abba. So as a Christian, I know that through the song Abba Father. And so it was fun to hear that word being used like in an everyday relationship. And as a Christian, we were told that's a very intimate love to call, Jesus called Abba, he called God the Father Abba. And that was kind of pushing the limits, but at the time. So now I understand that. And I think of just the role of parents in our society, how incredibly important they are. As a teacher, I need parents. I need their support, raising children to help us grow up and get there. And as an athletic director, the interplay with parents is like anything, probably just like you as parent to parent. I've been dealing with some parents where I'm like, wow, I'm not surprised that kids don't follow rules, because I've had to confront parents not following rules. And then there's parents who just say thank you and appreciate what we do. And it's just like students as well. So for parents out there who take the job seriously, thank you. As a teacher, as a coach, I love my own parents. I get to see them today. That's a real gift. Our time with our own parents is limited. And I think all children should hopefully realize that. What is Emily Dickinson? I think she has a powerful quote, about parents. I should look it up. I think it's like, the world without parents is a cold place, but we need parents. And so we support parents. And just by you listening to those parents and giving some perspective, I'm sure they appreciated that.
Well, it's one of those journeys that you don't realize when you sign up for it, that it never ends. You kind of think of your parenting, your time of parenting, you get them off to college, you've done your job. And in many ways, that's just the beginning. It's just that small stage of having them at home. But, again, it's, the school where I work is the school where my boys went. And there are a number of parents there who helped me raise my own kids, with that sense of community. Yeah. And, last night was the school auction, and this is the 15th year in a row I've gone to this, this auction. Now, of course, last night it was virtual. Last year it was as well. So it's not really the same, but, there were still, over 100 people that came together online to celebrate that community. And I think that's really powerful. And I know, community is important in your life. It's important in my life. And it's important, in so many cultures that around the world. There's a different sense of community that I think, you and I both respect and admire. And, the golf community I know is important to you. And last week was a huge, exciting week in your life. I know Masters Week. I kept thinking of you. So talk about that a little bit and how fun that was for you to watch.
Yeah, always a joy to celebrate Masters Week. And as you were kind of talking about community, I was thinking about at St. Francis, the word that one of the hallmarks of that was a Freudian slip. After 16 years at St. Ignatius, one of the hallmarks at St. Francis, a Holy Cross school, is the notion of family. So Notre Dame's a Holy Cross school, and just really taking family seriously. So I am wondering, Haley, if we would default to family over community. And I say that because I gave a presentation to the Holy Cross Institute and I talked about family. And one of the questions I challenged the attendees to think about is, okay, if this is a family, what kind of family do you want? And what are some attributes that are important to your family? And I'm going to link this to the masters because one of the attributes of a family is respect. And this goes back to the notion of parents. So parents have a role and, children have a role. And so with respect, I just thought the masters was such a wonderful way to kind of think about respect. And I say that because the winner, Hideki Matsuyama, who hails from Japan, was the first Japanese golfer to win a major. And I was able to travel there in 2015. So I learned a little bit about their culture. And in Japan, he wouldn't have been announced as Hideki Matsuyama. It would have been Matsuyama Hideki. And why is that? Because your family name always comes first. So with baseball players, with golfers, with anyone, you represent that family. And I think that that's such a sign of respect and that you are something larger than yourself. And another kind of moment in the tournament that went viral, at the end, his caddy put the pin back in the hole and he bowed. And he's not even bowing at anyone. He's bowing at the game, at the moment, realizing kind of what had transpired. And I think like a bow like that and just an awareness, what an incredible sign of respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't know that about Japanese culture with the last name first, but yeah, absolutely. That is putting family before self.
Yeah. Now, I don't know what you think of this, but I shared with my students, as much as I love that, the one limitation, and it's not a hang up, and some students have hyphenated last names, and I know your son Edward's middle name is your maiden name. I'm the product of two families. So Strickers is just obviously, my dad has 5 brothers, so there's a lot of Strickers up in, Washington State area. So when I go there, it's a very different experience because they know my family name. But, my mom's family gets kind of hidden. And so her maiden name was Naughton. And that's a very Irish name. And people don't know that part of my family history. So that's the one limitation. And I understand it just makes things easier. But at some point, you can't keep adding names on names. But it's a thoughtful way to just represent both homes.
Right. It is actually. And I hadn't really thought about that. I was Scott. I actually probably have 3 different names here. You could use Scott, my maiden name, which was obviously, my father's surname. And, my mom was Vandewey, which is a very well-known name, in kind of past sports, the sports world. And now I'm a Di Maria. And, people mess up they mispronounce that name all the time, to the point where, if I'm making a reservation somewhere, I just use Scott because nobody messes that up. I'm sure you get that with Strickers all the time, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I get, Di Maria, Demaria, there's name, space, no space, capital, no capital. And, people apologize all the time for the misspelling or the mispronunciation. And, I always say, kind of half jokingly, but I guess to make them feel better, don't worry about it. It doesn't bother me. It's not really my last name. And, of course it is. And it is my children's last name. But you're right. My children are as much Scots as they are, Di Marias. But, that's probably a whole different topic for why we do names. But I don't know if I would have hyphenated. I do use Scott in some, worlds that I interact in. I know of one couple who got married and combined their names. One was a Zimmerman and one was an Ungarelli, and they're now the Zimmerellis. So that's an interesting take too. So names is we could have a whole podcast talking about names. So I might have to add that to our list.
Yes. But cheers to Hideki. I'll just call him by his first name. And he's really been such a great competitor. He's been in the wings for a while. So he was due. And the Olympics will be in Tokyo this summer. And it'll be interesting. Some people are like, is he going to carry the flag? And will he carry the torch? And what role will he play? And he's very humble and just huge congrats. And it was a wonderful way. The Masters, I'm always excited just to talk to my students about it because I do have such love for it, but an exciting way to just kind of talk about Japanese culture and with any culture, strong sense of culture, what can we learn from them? What are some positives and what are some things that we question? So I think we can talk a little bit about that later, but I have often wondered, Haley, what is it like growing up in a world when I knew you as Haley Scott because I knew you before, you were married as an undergrad. What is it like growing up never having to spell your last name? So,
yeah, exactly.
Just one of the many burdens I carry.
I know.
I think I can handle it. Yeah.
Yes, it's. I hadn't even thought of it that way. I just knew everybody knew Scott.
Scott would be one T or two. Maybe that's the only. Yeah.
Maybe. But my brother and my dad, but more my brother is, they're Steve Scott. So, with Stephen Scott, people used to always ask him, what's it like to have two first names?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So,
yep.
Names it's always good discussion.
Yes. Well, let's move into our spiritual stew. What's cooking?
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of scripture or.
I love today's gospel, the words that really, jumped out at me. We hear the words, peace be with you. And, these are familiar words, not only in the Bible, Jesus talks about peace, often, many times you hear, whether it's peace be with you or, any sort of form of him offering peace. But, we hear those words in the Mass as well. It's a very, it's a time in the Mass that is very community focused and oriented. We greet each other when we come in, or at least we used to when we were in church, and even we do, when we were on our Zoom Mass. But it's a time to greet each other and often offer the sign of peace. And so for me, of course, going to a Catholic high school, not being Catholic at the time, so, being this teenage girl who wants to fit in and wants to be a part of things and going to Mass at Xavier and not being Catholic, it was always the one part of the Mass that I could fully participate in. And, of course, in many communal settings, when you're not necessarily in a church, whether it's, Mass at Xavier in a gym or, always during our Monogram Club Masses, the sign of peace, takes forever because you feel like you have to offer it to everyone.
Right.
But I loved that. I loved kind of climbing over the bleachers at Xavier to be able to hug my friends and wish them peace. And again, it was something that I could fully participate in this Mass. And, I didn't always know what to say. You learn as you sit through Masses as a non-Catholic, you can kind of mumble your way through the responses. But I knew the sign of peace. So for me, that's always been just a very comforting time. And I miss it. I miss... Even when I go to Mass in a church now, I miss even shaking someone's hand that I don't know. And, you miss that comfort of a hug of, maybe it's a colleague, but you know them well enough to give them a hug. And I'm a hugger. So, if I know you even casually and we're giving, offering the sign of peace during Mass, I'm going to hug you. And I miss that. And I really, I don't think I knew how much I missed it till I actually went to Mass, returned to Mass in the church and realized you couldn't do that, right? Yeah. So I'm still offering, a sign of peace with a wave. But I don't think that's what Jesus fully, it doesn't feel like I'm offering that same sense of myself in offering that peace. And they're very powerful words. When you look at the way they're offered in the gospel reading, I think about, how often could we respond to someone with those words, peace be with you, if it's someone we're disagreeing with, if it's someone we've met on the street, those are words that Jesus uses. And, how would they be received today if, someone was grumbling in a store or got mad at me because they thought I cut them off in line or whatever it is. And I just looked at them and I said, peace be with you. They would probably think I was crazy. Yeah. And maybe there were clearly people, during, historical times who thought Jesus was crazy. I'm sure they did. But I love those words and I loved hearing them in the gospel today. And it's a reminder for me of how peaceful I want to be and also how much I miss offering it, within a physical sense to other people. Yeah.
Haley, I appreciate just the perspective because I have thought a lot about how folks can participate in the Mass. And so you've named one area, and participation is important. And how can we participate? So if it's through song, if it's through, offering ourselves in the gift of peace, I don't know, I'd urge people to really kind of think about that a little bit more, including myself. Like, how are we participating? I've said this before, like, I think my brother participates by offering a prayerful presence, but what are different ways that we can participate? And it reminded me of an example, something that happened in my parish, St. Dominic's. A lot of street people will be there at Mass. So I used to go to 5:30 on Sunday. And when we say diverse, it is truly diverse, like you name it. And that includes street people. And there was a person sitting behind me that smelled so badly. And I was really uncomfortable because, I don't think I was uncomfortable. I didn't mind the street person being there because they're part of the community. It's a regular event, but the smell was difficult. And when it came time for peace, I froze. And this couple that was sitting next to me, I watched them. They went right in. They gave this person the sign of peace, no problem. And they were great teachers for me. And I've never forgotten that. And then it gave me the courage or whatever I needed to just go in. And I'm humbled by that they were there and that I saw my own limitation. But I think that's where your participation in a parish can be really, by showing up, I learned something in that way. And then, you've kind of named like what those words mean, peace be with you, and how do we live that out in our lives? I had an incident almost probably 12 years ago with somebody in my neighborhood about parking. So I park on the street. I live on a busy street, Fillmore Street in San Francisco, and we really got into an argument. Well, wouldn't you know it, I see this guy all the time. Even still, we never talk. There's always a sneer when he sees me. I don't really smile at him. But part of me, like recently, was kind of just wanted to approach him and just say, hey, peace be with you, or I don't even know what I want to say, but the sentiment, the feeling of peace is something I want to offer him, because I'm that battle, that's long gone. I don't need to carry it anymore.
Well, and you may hear this come up again in the melting pot, our takeaways. I may challenge you to do that, but you say the incident's over, but it's not, right? Because you're still carrying the unsettled feelings with you.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we might have to work on that, but I get it. It's, he would probably, I'd be actually very curious to see how he would respond if you offered him a sign of peace, right?
Yeah. Right.
He may be feeling the same way. It doesn't sound like it if he's sneering at you, but he might.
Yeah. Yep. Because we're sharing the same space, the same sidewalk. And it's already hard enough, honestly, right now. So it would take some courage, but that's a great takeaway to consider. So,
well, and it brings us, to know, something else I know we want to talk about, and that is, apologizing. Now, this doesn't sound like an event you actually need to go back and apologize for. He may have forgotten about it or forgotten it happened. He might just not like you and know that there's something there that was, unsettling at some point. But, the art of a good apology is a fascinating topic.
Yeah. So this is something I'll definitely link in the show notes. There is a class at Notre Dame, but it's on ThinkND. It's available to anyone. And the professor is Dr. Megan Sullivan. It's outstanding. And this resonates with me because I teach a moral issues class. But part of this online course, there's worksheets, there's video clips, teachings. There was a link to this article about the art of a good apology. And in Japan, and there is this service that is burgeoning to a certain degree where a person can hire an individual to give an apology to someone they have wronged. And so I had my students read this because I thought this is so interesting. So I had talked about some attributes of Japanese culture with them because of Hideki Matsuyama. But then I also said, hey, here's another piece of culture where, again, if respect is really important. And it, like I mentioned 2 ways in sports that it manifests itself. But one really interesting way is that if you went into a coffee shop, Haley, and left your computer there, you would never worry about it being taken. If you leave your wallet on the rail train, the odds are like 90% return rate that you will get it back intact, again, because of respect. So when you wrong someone, there's this sense of respect, so you owe someone an apology, but they're hiring people to do it. And so I just had my students read the article, and we talked about, what do they think of this? What do they think of hiring someone to give an apology? Now, Sullivan claims that this is problematic in a moral life because there are certain things that only you can do for yourself or for others. Like, you can't hire someone to go to therapy for yourself, right? You have to do that. You can't hire someone to go on awkward dates so you can get to know somebody. And one of those things is not only, you have to determine what makes a life good, is her ultimate claim, but you have to offer the apology. And so it sparked a conversation about, well, what is a good apology? And then, are you free to reject an apology? I have found so many people, and I see this unfortunately maybe through social media, who are like, it's too late, the apology is not accepted. And I just wonder, as a Christian, are we free to reject an apology? Like with this neighbor, what if he rejects my apology? Well, apologies are given and they need to be sincere and authentic, is what a lot of students said. And it prompts, the question of forgiveness. Can anything be forgiven? What is necessary for forgiveness? And I've read enough to hear that one of the hallmarks of Christianity is the emphasis on forgiveness. And it's not to be confused with this idea that everything's okay,
right?
But the art and the act of forgiveness is so important. And we see this in scripture in Matthew 18:22. It's the parable of the unforgiving servant. Peter asked Jesus, how often must I forgive my neighbor? And he says 7 times, 70 times. And Christ says 7 times 70. And, 7 is a number of perfection. And it's speaking to the love of God, that God's love is perfect. We probably, won't get there. But the idea is that we're called to be merciful and forgiving and in numerous times. And that's not only 490 times in life, but many times. So.
What an interesting discussion for your students who probably, haven't really thought about it. And there's a lot there. We can offer apologies. We can accept apologies. Can we accept an apology and not forgive? Is it okay to receive the apology but not be ready to forgive? The sincerity of, for sure, we always want our apologies to be sincere. We had a thing in our house, again, bringing it back to, my kids and raising them and trying to figure out how to do that. I used to say to my kids, and still do, I kind of half joke, they're going to put this on my grave. If they say, I'm sorry, I'll say, well, I'll know you're sorry when you don't do it again. Yeah. So you don't want the words, and really what that's just saying is I don't want an empty apology. You can't just say I'm sorry and move on. That doesn't work. Or that's not a true apology. We want it to be an apology of action, which is why, bringing it back to, in Japan where you have these apology services, it almost seems like a formality you just have to go through. I don't know how you could put meaning and, this apology of action behind it. If you've wronged your spouse and you send someone to apologize to them, how does that make it? It'd be curious to learn more about that. And, how does that make it meaningful in a way that we find it meaningful? And perhaps that's just a cultural difference, is that's accepted. Those apologies are accepted there, whereas they might not be accepted here. But I do think ultimately, it is one of the greatest graces of our faith is, I know that there is really nothing my children could do for me to stop loving them, right? I will always love them. I will always help them through any challenges if they ask for my help. And that's really who God is in our lives. If we allow him to be, he's going to love us no matter what. He is going to help us through any challenge if we let him. And we'll accept our apology. I will accept my children's apologies, no matter what, if I know they're sincere. And, I know God will do the same for us as well. If we are sincerely apologizing for our sins and asking for that forgiveness, it's great comfort to know that we're going to get it.
Yeah. And, it's interesting to think that some people don't give apologies. So we're assuming people do. We're assuming that you kind of said some criteria here for your children. It's not really criteria. You're saying like what you would hope for in that apology.
Right.
And it's hard to even think, some people don't even offer an apology. Or I've heard it's too late. I've heard that as well. But Randy Pausch, the late Randy Pausch, he's the author of The Last Lecture. He was a professor at Carnegie Mellon. That was probably popular 10 years ago. Do you remember that?
At least, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, one of his teachings and one of his messages was, there's a lot of bad apologies. So here's 3 steps. And he doesn't use criteria, but 3 steps for a good apology. 1 is to say, I'm sorry. 2 is to say, I was wrong. And 3, how can I make it right? And I think that's really interesting. I think it's helpful. So, a great assignment for all of us is what makes a good apology. And it's not for the other, but I don't know, and maybe it is for the other person, because we live in community. Like we're saying, we live in family. We've talked about thank you notes before, Haley, but I got a number of thank you notes this week from the girls volleyball team for just helping make this season go. And they were all so thoughtfully written. It was so touching. And I thought, what's criteria, not steps. I'm going to use steps for a good thank you note. And if there are steps, I might have to look to their notes because they're in there. They were personal. They were enthusiastic, but genuine. They named what they were grateful for. And they expressed their appreciation. So steps for a good apology, steps for a good thank you note. There's probably other things we could advise.
And they're not much different, right? Showing our gratitude and offering apology is are not too far off. You're right. There are steps for that. I think back again when I love my thank you notes and have hopefully passed that on to my children. When they were younger, I used to,
and to our listeners.
I used to create a template for them. So, of course, when they're just learning to write, they're going to have a hard time writing an entire thank you note out. So I would write out, dear blank, thank you for blank. And then they'd have to say why they loved it or what they loved about it and what they're going to do with it. And, then it would say love, they'd have to fill in their name. So they just kind of had to fill it in so that I could give them the structure for it. But, an apology is the same as a thank you note. You want it to be genuine. You want it to come from the heart. You want it to have meaning. You want it to be specific. And those are great takeaways for us, this week. I'm going to challenge you that if you see your neighbor,
no, I'm afraid to.
Well, and I think you just need to, maybe offering him peace is the way we're doing it now in church or in Zoom is smiling, offering him, a friendly response. You don't have to be verbal, but maybe just that kind presence. And, I do think if we find ourselves needing to apologize this week, I think, really, thinking of the last lecture and taking those steps, saying, I'm sorry, acknowledging it was my fault. And then, asking or saying how can I make it right? I think, keeping that in mind, because I'm sure there's going to be something I do this week that I'm going to need to apologize for. And also thinking about the attributes of our family. We've talked about that a lot this episode too. Who are we as a family? Are we a family of gratitude that, also says we're sorry? What are those important attributes for us? Those are the things I'm going to think about. And I have to say the apology might be the toughest one. I do not like to admit that I was wrong. I do not like to, acknowledge those faults and those flaws. Especially with my husband, I like to just sort of walk out of the room because I know it's going to pass, because he is very good at forgiveness. But I'm going to work on the art of the apology.
Yeah. Well, the reality is, it's when I was teaching, I said, this is something we've all dealt with, and we will probably, like you said, probably this week. And to a certain degree, it takes some of the pressure off. So, I think it's worth considering. And you've already given me my homework for the week, and also my lesson plan. I want to thank you for that. On Tuesday, I'm going to have my students. We're back more than we have been. So there's more kids in the classroom. I'm going to have them determine what's the criteria, the steps. I keep saying criteria because that's such an ethical framework. What's the steps for a good thank you note, and see what we come up with. But shout out to Mike Rubin and the St. Francis girls volleyball team for just their thoughtfulness on that. And I don't know that he knew that, but that was one of the secret sauce for the LPGA. They were really and I got to pull up the article and I'll link it as well. They were on the down low, and Mike Wan, the former commissioner, really encouraged the women to write thank you notes to the sponsors. And they did, and it paid off. And I think it's just awesome. So another props for our thank you notes, and and expressing gratitude.
Absolutely. The power of gratitude is great. And I think, kudos to your women's, your girls volleyball coach. He may not have said, hey, you need to write Miss Strickers a thank you note, but he's clearly created a culture of gratitude on that team. Again, coaching is a whole topic that we could discuss at some point, but he's teaching those important life skills, and that makes a great coach. So props to him too.
Sure. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Anne, it's nice to be back. I'm so excited about our new platform, to spread our podcast far and wide. So thank you for that. And I always enjoy our time together talking.
That's right. Well, thank you. And for our listeners, when I say show notes, you'll be able to find those at Faith Fondue on Twitter. Haley and I are working on a website. That's another goal of ours. There's some engagement on Instagram at Faith Fondue, but these are other ways to share our information. And looking forward to continuing season 2.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
And sharing it far and wide. So thank you, Anne, and we'll talk next week.
Have a great week.